This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, I'll review an in-depth profile of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to ask what kind of Democrat is he? Wealth strategist Rebecca Walser joins me. We're going to talk about the state of the economy and how we should respond to it. I'll cheer a federal judge in Louisiana who refuses to stay his injunction stopping the Biden administration from colluding with digital platforms to censor dissident voices. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
Needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
I haven't spoken very much on this podcast about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a very interesting figure to emerge to challenge Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination for 2024. There's an article in the New Yorker by the editor, David Remnick, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And what strikes me as I look at the article in some detail is the contrast between Remnick's pathetic efforts to portray Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a kook and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming across as an inquisitive, interesting, experienced guy, somebody certainly worth considering. Now, I'm not going to vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is, as he makes pretty clear in the interview, he's definitely a Democrat. On a wide range of issues, if you made a list of 10 issues, he's probably a Democrat on 7 of them. But he's on the other hand, independent-minded on some critical issues, including COVID, including the vaccine, the origins of COVID, censorship, and even to some degree on the trans issue. Now, a lot of this article is aimed at trying to show that he is a, quote, conspiracy theorist. And this phrase is bandied about so much that it's worth noting that this phrase would be damning. You're a conspiracy theorist only if conspiracies did not exist. But will anyone claim that there are no conspiracies in the world? There's no such thing as a conspiracy. Obviously, every organized crime is a conspiracy. There's conspiracy, for example, to have censorship in digital platforms. And this is, in my view, the government says we are pursuing a, quote, all-government approach. That's their phrase. In other words, all the different organs of government come together and conspire. Conspire simply means meet and collude and work together to achieve this goal. So the point is that the conspiracy theories are an attempt to make sense of a peculiar, a bizarre, and unexplained situation. They may be right, they may be wrong, but you can't invalidate them simply by chanting conspiracy theory. You have to look at the merits of what is being said. So let's look at the merits of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The article has a lot of sarcasm. He's, quote, MAGA adjacent. And all they mean by MAGA adjacent is that there are people on the right, including Trump, including Alex Jones, including a few others, who have praised Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to which he rightly goes, so what? He goes, they agree with me on certain things, and he goes, I'm not going to repudiate them. He goes, I'm actually going to try to find common ground where I can. In other words, an eminently sensible position, and yet you have the kind of sputtering outrage of David Remnick. He says things like, but why do you think Donald Trump admires you? Are you not suspicious of that? And basically, what strikes me is Robert F. Kennedy's coolness, his savoir-faire, is basically like, why should I be? He goes, you know what? My job is not to drive people apart. And then this line, crushing to the New Yorker, what do you think is worse, the White House using the FBI to censor political dissenters, or whatever Trump has done? So here's RFK Jr. basically saying that the left is worse than Trump. I mean, you couldn't make a bigger insult to these guys, and you can see why they hate him, and they want to push him off the pedestal for the Democratic nomination. They go on to talk about the fact that he is a different kind of Democrat, to which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. goes, yeah, quote, I'm a Kennedy Democrat. I believe in labor unions. I believe in a strong, robust middle class. I believe in racial justice, in policies that actually help the lowest people on the low totem pole. So then David Remnick goes, well, isn't Biden trying to do that? And Kennedy goes, Well, why do you do the lockdowns? Lockdowns robbed $4 trillion from the middle class and the poor in this country and transferred it to the super rich. I mean, indisputable, right? The New Yorker has to contradict this, so they throw in the $4 trillion figure was likely an estimate for the price of the federal bailout. Well, yeah, so many of the 500 billionaires he seems to refer to rose up in other countries, especially China. Think about it. It only strengthens Robert F. Kennedy's point. You're making billionaires, and they're not even billionaires in America. They're billionaires all over the world, and especially in China. So this is a robbery of the lower middle class. And then David Remnick goes, are you trying to say that the Biden administration deliberately caused this effect? And Kennedy Jr. goes, no, I think that they made mistakes, which disqualifies them from continuing to do the job. In other words, if you're such a bumbling incompetent and you produce such bad results with your policies, do you mean the pilot intended to crash the plane? No, but he did crash the plane, and that means he's not really qualified to be a pilot. So this is the point. So as I read all this, I sort of feel from a distance a certain admiration for this kind of guy. I also agree with sentiments that he echoes, which, by the way, would come out of early Obama. I think the kind of tribalism you're advocating is poisonous to our country. I think it's toxic. So here's Kennedy willing to talk back to the New Yorker, do something that we are generally familiar more with Trump for doing, which is blame the media directly. You're part of the problem, my friend. He goes, I believe in an America without censorship, an America that fights for our Constitution, America that has moral authority around the world, that projects economic power around the globe rather than military violence. So all of this is actually a throwback to an earlier Democratic Party that clearly is no more. So Robert F. Kennedy is a kind of anomaly. He's in a party that where he doesn't really belong. He's not a Republican either. So he's in a sort of political no man's land. So I continue to find him interesting not as a genuine alternative, but interesting as a trenchant critic of leftist orthodoxy and the horror show that today's Democratic Party has become. Debbie and I had a New Year's resolution to lose weight, and thankfully PhD weight loss came to our rescue. Debbie's already lost 24 pounds. I've lost 27. We are now both on maintenance. The program is based on science and nutrition, no injections, no pills, no long hours in the gym, no severe calorie restriction, just good, sound, scientifically proven nutrition. It's very simple. They make it easy by providing 80% of your food at no additional cost. They tell you when and what to eat, and guess what? You can do this without ever being hungry. The founder, Dr. Ashley Lucas, has her PhD in chronic disease and sports nutrition. She's also a registered dietitian. She helps people lose weight and, most important, maintain that weight loss for life. So are you ready? Take the step of losing weight like Debbie and I have. Call PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition. Here's the number. Write it down. 864-644-1900, or find them online at myphdweightloss.com. The number to call again, 864-644-1900. Guys, I'm really delighted to welcome back to the podcast our friend Rebecca Walser. She's a wealth strategist, a tax attorney, best-selling author. She has her own podcast called Crashes and Taxes. I think you know she's also a sponsor of this podcast. And so her website, friendofdinesh.com, friendofdinesh.com. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. Let's start by talking about just economic policy, because I watched the Biden administration do things, and I asked myself, is there an economic philosophy behind it? It's hard for me to see one. What do you think is driving their approach to economic issues, whether it's inflation or energy? Is it kind of ad hoc? We'll do this over here, we'll do that over there. Or do they have an underlying way of pulling it all together?
Yeah, I think that the message that the administration puts out there, Dinesh, is one of Bidenomics, and that it's great, and they've increased manufacturing, and they've had, the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. They've had all these millions of jobs created, and they spin all of this. And the thing is, if you're in economics, you're someone that understands that you can pick and choose their statistics, and you know that better than anyone, Dinesh. We know you can make things and read the headline number that you want. But, this past week, while Biden was out there touting his Bidenomics and talking specifically about manufacturing and South Carolina, to be specific, he was highlighting, we just lost 42,000 manufacturing jobs in last month's payroll numbers. And when you look at it, we've had 8 consecutive months of manufacturing coming down. We have a 5.3% depression for manufacturing year over year. This is a global phenomenon that's happening worldwide, which is very indicative of recessionary cycles. And interestingly enough, we usually see this happening in manufacturing when we're about 1 to 2 years into a recession. So the fact that we're not technically even called that we're in a recession right now, Dinesh, is really fake. Economically speaking, they've really juxtaposed the numbers and really, machinations of these numbers to make things look like they can go out and tout them when the real American is sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out how they're going to pay their bills.
Do you think, Rebecca, I mean, traditionally, economics 101, a recession is the opposite of inflation. The two are kind of on opposite ends of the fence, so to speak. And yet we seem to have inflationary trends in the economy at the same time that you have this economic slowdown. So are we seeing a return to the so-called stagflation of the 70s, or is there kind of a different way to look at it?
If we were to continue in this current vortex, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly what's happening as we're going into bad economic times. But what's the driver still of the over 9 million job openings that we continue to still have are the small and medium-sized businesses. If you look at the ADP report that came out last week, we had created 497 private jobs. Of those, 199,000 were from businesses that are 50 employees or smaller. So it's really the medium and small businesses that is still giving Jerome Powell such a headache on the inflation numbers. Because what happens, Dinesh, is when people are not working, and we have about 100 million Americans that are of working age that aren't working. Now, that is a lot of reasons. People are retired, people are in school, whatever. There's lots of reasons. However, that is an astronomically large, it's a third of our population just about that could be working that actually isn't working. And so as you have 9 million, 10 million jobs, we've had jobs come down some, but as you have so many people that aren't working, that aren't accepting jobs, payroll has to go up to bring these people to get them interested enough to come back to work. Part of the problem with Bidenomics is we have too many programs, government programs still, that don't have any kinds of means testing or work requirements that are keeping people out of the workforce. But you've had, even though wage growth has slowed, it has still continued to go up because we have to attract these employees. So you have this really weird dichotomy that you wouldn't normally see, where it's still so hard to get people to work. So we're having wages go up, although slowing down the wage increases, yet we have 9 million openings, yet we're really going into recession. So where we see it is Fortune 100, Fortune 500, medium-sized businesses, hiring freezes, Dinesh. I have a lot of colleagues that can't get jobs at big, investment banks in New York City and Boston, and that's unusual. Hiring freezes. And then, of course, we've had a lot of layoffs in the last, 18 months from big corporations. So it's a very unusual place, but you're right. The stagflation occurs when you have inflationary pressure for too much money supply, yet your economy is starting to fail. So that's when you get that weird stagflation type of interesting situation.
I mean, Rebecca, you're making to me a critical point, which is you're saying that because the Biden people could go, well, yeah, we've got these problems with jobs and so on. Well, that's really why we want to spend all this money through the government, because we want to help revive the economy and create new jobs and so on. But you're saying that when you offer people all these benefits and they begin to put them all together, I can get some money over here and some money over there and some money over here. Well, why the heck do I need to show up for work? That this so-called remedy is making the problem far, far worse. And I think that's a key point. Let's take a pause. When we come back, I want to pivot to what we as sort of savers and investors and people trying to improve our lot, how we can respond to this peculiar situation. We are living in economically precarious times. The debt ceiling crisis has come to a head. The Biden administration is doing its best to force more government spending. They've reached a settlement to get the deal done. But for now, our national debt continues to skyrocket. Well, how are you protecting your savings? Times like these are when concerned savers like me turn to gold. And I, like thousands of similar-minded people, buy my gold from Birch Gold. Here's the easiest way to do it. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. You don't pay a penny out of pocket. As the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, band together against the dollar, more and more central banks are diversifying. You know what they're buying? Gold. Well, follow their lead. Get started by texting Dinesh to 989898 for your free information kit on gold. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers. Birch Gold can help protect your savings too. So go ahead, text Dinesh to 989898 today. I'm back with our friend Rebecca Walser, a wealth strategist, a tax attorney, best-selling author. Her podcast, Crashes and Taxes, and the website is friendofdinesh.com. Rebecca, as we watch this economy, just, as people who have money that we've saved up over the years and money that we've put aside for retirement, we're a little bit perplexed because as I think back, going back to the really 1980s, I didn't have any money in the 80s, but I did have some in the 90s. And, wealth strategists would tell us, listen, you need to have some stocks, you need to have some bonds. The ratio of that depends on your age. By and large, you buy into the stock market and kind of hang in there, have a little bit of international stocks. I think a point you made is that they're giving the same advice now, almost recycled, 25 or 30 years later. And you're saying that this advice, which by the way, wasn't the wrong advice in the 90s and not even in the early 2000s, but you're saying that advice may be obsolete today. Now, why is that?
Yeah. So, obviously in the 80s, before Reagan's tax reform went into effect in 87 from 86, the 86 tax reform, we had the highest top tax bracket on active income to over 50%. So what was happening is as soon as the 401k came out, people could realize, oh my gosh, I can make money now and I can defer it and I'll pay it when I retire and I'm in a lower bracket. That made sense. And so basically, people went to the 401k. In 1981 was the biggest transition to the 401k, came out in 74. But 81 was massive, widespread, swept across corporate America and never looked back. And the problem is that the government's own analysis shows that when people retire and today in 2023, future tax rates will be higher than they have been for the last 30 years. Ronald Reagan cut tax rates to our second lowest rates ever after FDR in the 30s. So FDR had the lowest tax rates, then Ronald Reagan, then Donald Trump under his 2018 tax reform. So we're in the third lowest tax schedule ever. And yet you still have Wall Street pushing for everyone to maximize pre-tax wealth investment. Why? Because that gives Wall Street the largest amount, dollar cost average every month from millions and millions of 401k workers. And then they have disconnected themselves from the tax advice. So they just give you a little asterisk and say, we don't talk about tax. Go talk to your tax professional about what this means for your future when you do actually have to take this money out and pay the taxes. We are a wealth advisory that started with a tax specialty and a tax focus. So that is the first thing from a tax perspective. I will also say, Dinesh, this is probably the most dangerous period of time, probably, I will go ahead and say maybe ever, in the history of American equities. And let me tell you why. Because Wall Street is out there right now telling everybody that NASDAQ is up 30% and this is a bull market and we are off to the races and we are ready to go. And they are telling the retail mom and pop investor, you and me, and the people that have 401ks, they're telling this message to because they want everyone to have FOMO, fear of missing out. They've been on the sidelines because 2022 was a disaster. So they've been on the sidelines. They've been scared. Now they've got this message propaganda in them every day. Get back in, bull, bull, bull. But what are the institutional dollars doing? The hedge funds had the largest short position, $1 trillion against $1 trillion short against the S&P 500, the largest short position since April of last year. So the institutional money sees that something is not right and that we are going to have some kind of economic disruption, and they're betting against this market. So I just want to express to people that do not allow yourself to get sucked into the pressure of, I have to get back in, I'm missing out. What if you're not missing out? What if the next 6 months is the worst 6 months because of a global transition that's happening with the BRICS nations, and we see equities and bonds collapse, and you participated because you thought you were going to get a 30% return on NASDAQ? I'm just really cautioning people that this has not resolved itself. We have massive liquidity problems, and I just don't want people to feel the pressure to get back in with full force to where they were before.
Rebecca, we did a call, Debbie and I and you, a few weeks ago, and you made a point that I had never thought of, that, I try to stay informed about these things. I obviously have a stake in them with investments. I've always bought into the idea that I should put money into IRAs and so-called SEP accounts, a kind of special form of an IRA. And the idea is that the money accumulates and you only pay taxes at the end when you take the money out, presumably when you're much older. And so the money gets to grow. And it seems like a wonderful deal. But you made the point that, look, if tax rates now are X, and at a future date, they're going to be higher. They're going to be Y, let's just say 5 points higher. Then when you take the money out, you're actually going to be paying more on your money. So you might be better doing what's called a Roth IRA. And a Roth IRA is when you pay the taxes up front, you pay, you're done with it, and then the money can grow. And then when you take it out, you don't have to pay the government anything. And I got to say, I thought of myself as a pretty smart guy, but I was like, I never thought of that, and that is such a critical and obvious and powerful point. So that's the kind of advice, guys, that you get from Rebecca Walser. Her website is friendofdinesh.com. This is a woman you need to talk to about your finances, because I think she's quite right. We're in perilous waters, and at the very least, we need to have a reliable hand advising us and steering us in the times ahead. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Really appreciate having you.
Thanks, Dinesh.
Aches and pains are, well, such a pain. They disrupt your day. And if that's your problem, Relief Factor is your solution. Debbie and I started taking Relief Factor 2 years ago. The difference we've seen in our joints, nothing short of amazing. Aches and pains are totally gone thanks to this 100% drug-free solution called Relief Factor. Now, how does it work? Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation. That's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor become regular customers. They order more because it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. She can do the exercises now that for several years she wasn't able to do. So Relief Factor's been a big game changer for her, her aunt, other members of our family, Mike here in the studio, and for many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of just $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 800-4-RELIEF to find out more about this offer. The number again, 800-4-RELIEF, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. I discussed yesterday how Judge Terry Doughty of Louisiana issued an injunction forbidding multiple agencies of the Biden administration, the White House, the FBI, the CDC, the Surgeon General, CISA, the Cybersecurity Agency, the State Department, all from communicating about censorship with any digital platform. Now, needless to say, the government is quite perturbed at this ruling. They've announced that they're going to appeal it. But they went right back to Judge Doughty and said to him, in effect, since we're appealing it, we want you to stay your ruling. In other words, delay the enforcement of it pending the appeal. And Judge Doughty considers it, and in a recent decision, he goes, no, I'm denying your motion for me to delay the ruling. The ruling goes into effect immediately. Now, the government had essentially argued that it faced, quote, irreparable harm with this injunction in effect, even if it's in effect for a short time, because it said that the injunction was broad in scope, the terms were ambiguous, and most importantly, it might prevent or enjoin the government from engaging in lawful conduct. In other words, there may be some lawful ways to communicate with these digital platforms, and even those were being blocked by essentially the judge going, no communication about censorship at all. And so the government argues, the Biden administration argues that working with social media companies is a way of preventing, quote, grave harm to the American people and the country's various democratic processes. So they're doing it out of good intentions. They're trying to save democracy. And the beauty of Judge Doty's order denying their request is its clarity. It makes just a couple of points, but it makes them very forcefully. First of all, the judge goes through very specific examples of active collaboration, but also attempts to coerce digital companies to engage in censorship. And he says, in effect, this is flatly prohibited by the First Amendment. And so he goes on to say, listen, these plaintiffs, which is the state of Missouri and Louisiana, are likely to prevail in this case. And that's the basis for me granting this injunction. And he says, quote, the First Amendment free speech rights of the plaintiffs by far outweighs the defendants' interests. And then in, I think, the critical line in this opinion, he says the preliminary injunction only prohibits what defendants have no right to do. Remember, the defendants had argued, the Biden administration, said basically, we might be blocked from engaging in lawful conduct. Judge goes, no. What I'm telling you to do is not do the following. You cannot urge, encourage, pressure, or induce in any manner the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech on social media platforms. And then the judge goes, the defendants have made no argument that they are legally allowed to take such action. The defendants are asking the court to grant them relief to a preliminary injunction that only bars illegal conduct. The only effect of staying the preliminary injunction would be to free the defendants, the Biden administration, to, quote, urge, encourage, pressure, or induce the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech on social media platforms. So basically, the judge here takes the hard line. He says, look, I'm not saying that the Biden administration is prohibited from government speech. The government is entitled to speak. The government can say this is misinformation, but do that with a press release coming from the CDC or coming from the White House. You cannot induce private parties to engage in censorship. This is the key. The principle here is very simple. The government is prohibited from restricting speech, and it cannot achieve those ends by simply recruiting others to do what it cannot do. And here, as I mentioned yesterday, the judge is saying not only can the government not directly work with these digital platforms, it cannot work with intermediaries, these nonprofits like the Stanford Internet Observatory. You cannot tell the Stanford Internet Observatory, hey, listen, we want this guy kicked off of Twitter or this guy kicked off of YouTube, and then they communicate with those platforms. That is not allowed either. So this is a wonderful ruling. It shows that free speech that there are people in the judiciary that are very aware of the seriousness of the threat to free speech that's going on. And for this reason, I think that this Missouri versus Biden case, I'm following it in a little more microscopic detail than I normally do, but it's because I think it is perhaps the most important free speech case of our time. Guys, Mike Lindell has an amazing offer for my listeners and viewers on his Giza Elegance MyPillows. You'll get a Giza Elegance MyPillow for as low as $19.98, regular price $69.98. This MyPillow comes in 4 levels of support. By the way, you get deep discounts on all the MyPillow products, MyPillow towels, mattress topper, the robes, the My Slippers, and so much more. Go to MyPillow.com to get Mike's amazing offer on the Giza Elegance MyPillow for as low as $19.98 or call 800-876-0227 and use promo code Dinesh. The offer comes with a 10-year warranty, so you know it's going to last, and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose. It's time to start getting the quality sleep we not only want, but need. Go to MyPillow.com or call 800-876-0227. Use promo code Dinesh to take advantage of Mike's special offer on his Giza Elegance MyPillow. The number again, 800-876-0227. Don't forget to use the promo code DINESH Dinesh. Guys, I want to welcome back to the podcast our friend Cynthia Hughes. She's the founder of Patriot Freedom Project, the website patriotfreedomproject.com. She's also the author of Due Process Denied, The Detained, The Families, The Fallout. She's a wife and mother. She's also aunt to a January 6 defendant. Cynthia, thanks for joining me. I see the new book out, Due Process Denied. Also, a lot been going on with January 6 trials since the last time I had you on the podcast. Give us an update from your vantage point about what's happening with the larger J6 community, not just the defendants themselves, but also the families. I also want to ask you about what's in the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a joy to be with you and Debbie. Dinesh, I'm sad to report that 2.5 years later, not much has changed. 2.5 years later, we're still dealing with a very weaponized, government and DOJ. We're still dealing with arrests. We just had several arrests just a week ago. Patriot Freedom Project just funded 3 new defendants that are facing. They're not in jail, thank God, but they are going to be facing a DC jury possibly and DC judges, and we know how that is working out for all of these defendants. Yesterday, I got several phone calls from a few family members and a couple of different guys from the DC jail. If you recall, about a week or two ago, there was a gentleman outside the jail who went over to Barack Obama's house allegedly and had weapons or something like that. And he is now in the DC jail with, the J6 defendants. Now, he was a J6. He did have a warrant for his arrest because of J6, but then it clearly has some mental issues or emotional issues, and he did what he did. So I got several calls last night because there has been some fighting going on in the jail with this man. And about 14 or 15 of the defendants that have already been, housed in the DC jail for a long time now, are now in the hole. And this man is just, allegedly wandering around the jail and very combative and causing a lot of issues and disruptions. So apparently some big fight broke out, and that is what's going on in the DC jail. And, we're not surprised at that, right? I mean, this has been the status and the state of the defendants in the DC jail all this time, 2.5 years. So, but it just seems to keep escalating. And these people that are, languishing still behind bars, there are still people in pretrial detention, like William Crespin. He has not had his day in court. He has been in jail for 2.5 years. Jose Padilla just recently had a bench trial where he was found guilty on all counts. I believe maybe one misdemeanor he was found not guilty, and he won't go to sentencing until September. This is still the state of affairs, when it comes to January 6th defendants, specifically Trump supporters. And, Dinesh, if I may, we're learning now 2.5 years later, some people that went to the Capitol that day really were not Trump supporters. And, it's a bad look for people who did go there to support the president, who did go there with no intention of violence, and their lives have been, just massacred over all of this.
And yeah, I mean, I sense in you, and I feel it myself, just a sort of feeling of just helplessness a little bit, because it looks like, and the title of your book is Due Process Denied. Now, on the surface, we're seeing due process, right? Because a judge will say, this man is a danger to the community. He needs to be confined before trial. And then, of course, you have the paraphernalia of trials and juries and judges ruling on motions. So you've got all the outward trappings of a fair trial. But I think what you're saying, and I believe it too, that the inner essence of due process, which is that people are coming in a jury, they're open-minded, they want to hear what happened, they're going to give a fair verdict. That is really not occurring. And so you have a kind of wicked collusion between the prosecution, the swamp judges, and compliant juries who are only too happy to put their political opponents away and would throw away the key if they had the chance.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Everything you just said is spot on. And it's been this way for 2.5 years. And Dinesh, quite honestly, I fear we will still be seeing this for the next 1.5 years during this presidential, election. This is not about what happened on January 6th. Now, we do know, and we have learned 2.5 years later, there are some people that went there that day and did really bad things. Nobody wants to see a police officer, assaulted, or another person assaulted, windows broken. We don't want to see that. Okay. And we know that there are some people that went there and in fact did that and did it bad. Right. But people are still, entitled to their due process. And here's the problem. With this DOJ being so weaponized, we know that it's not really about the defendants, right? It's about Trump and Trump's supporters. That is what is really going on here. We're not talking about it enough. We're not doing enough about it. We have a very complacent Congress, a very complacent Senate. We're not seeing any action, from our elected leaders, if you will. And I'm very concerned for what is going to happen with these defendants. But as you know, when I got involved in this, obviously I got involved in this because of my own family. I have an adopted nephew, Tim, who is still in jail, by the way, for nonviolent crimes. But the families, Dinesh, I've met so many families in 2.5 years. We have helped so many families. It started with your generous gift from you and Debbie. We were able to help a ton of families in 2021. And, from doing some appearances with you and Steve Bannon, we raised some good money and we helped with $1 million in legal fees. That's over 100 cases we've helped on. And we've helped with so many families. I mean, there's so many children that are suffering. That is the real peril for me. That's the real issue for me. Not that we want to see somebody languishing behind bars. There's a lot of people that truly are innocent. My nephew is one of them. But the children, Dinesh, we have to make sure these children weather this trauma in their life. If we don't help these kids weather this trauma, that's when they could slip through the cracks. We see so much about child trafficking and, kids, falling prey to really bad situations. I have spent a lot of time with a lot of kids. I don't know if you know, but 2 weeks ago, I hosted a fundraiser at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, and I brought 26 January 6 families in. And President Trump, he graced us with his presence. He was, strong, and he was, his usual jovial self. He was so kind to these kids. We had several of the kids there. I would love to send you some pictures. He brought all the kids up on the podium with him. He hugged them. He shook their hand. He encouraged them. He uplifted them. He uplifted the families. I mean, I am out of words. I don't know what to do anymore and how we continue to weather this situation.
Well, guys, each of us should do our part, and this is a way that we can directly help the defendants, but more importantly, also help their families that are in a terrible situation, and now for a long time. The website is patriotfreedomproject.com, and my guest has been Cynthia Hughes, the founder of Patriot Freedom Project. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite you to check out my Locals channel. I post lots of exclusive content there, including content that is censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored, and you can also interact with me directly. I do a weekly live Q&A every Tuesday. That's tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, and no topic is off limits. I've also uploaded some very cool films to Locals, documentaries, feature films, both my films and also films by other independent producers. 2000 Mules is up there. I'm doing a big new film this year. I'll be giving you the inside scoop on Locals. And if you're an annual subscriber, you can watch all this content, stream it, and watch it for free. So check out my channel at dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. I'm in a Chekhovian frame of mind this week. I'm referring, of course, to the great Russian playwright and short story writer Anton Chekhov. I was reading a collection of his stories on the long flight back from London a couple of days ago. And I want to talk today about a short story, a very short story that's just called The Husband. You'll see here Chekhov's distinctive approach to things. He describes a single scene. He doesn't bother to moralize about it, but there's a lot of kind of psychological insight to be derived from it. So he begins by talking about the fact that in small provincial Russian towns, the cavalry regiments will occasionally stop by. They're on their way to another place or they're taking a break. And says Chekhov, such an event as the visit of officers always has the most exciting and inspiring effect on the inhabitants of provincial towns. Notice Chekhov in his language is very simple, very direct, no big words, no kind of quote, educated vocabulary, no attempt to impress you with his brilliance. He's just sort of narrating almost in a conversational style. And he talks about the fact that while everybody gets excited in the small town, he says the effect on the ladies is beyond all description. Basically, they go nuts. The regiment, they cry joyfully, the regiment is coming. And then says Chekhov, a very Chekhovian observation, what could this unknown regiment that came by chance today and would depart at dawn tomorrow mean to them? Like, why is it such a big deal? It's just a bunch of soldiers. They're coming into town. They're staying overnight. They're leaving. But, says Chekhov, no, this is a massive event in a small town. He's talking about the ladies, quote, they already knew, goodness knows how, that the colonel was married but not living with his wife, that the senior officer's wife had a baby born dead every year, that the adjutant was hopelessly in love with some countess and had even once attempted suicide. They knew everything. This is the nature of small towns. Gossip travels very rapidly, and suddenly everybody, quote, knows. Whether what they know is true or not is a whole other question. And so, says Chekhov, the first thing that the ladies press for is let's have a dance. And so the dance is organized, and Chekhov now describes it. He says, their wishes were carried out. At 9 o'clock, the military band starts playing, and, quote, the ladies felt as though they were on wings. Intoxicated by the dancing, the music, the clank of spurs, they threw themselves heart and soul into making the acquaintance of their new partners and quite forgot their old civilian friends. Here you see something psychologically interesting, which is that novelty is interesting. All these new people. Wow, who's this guy? Who's that guy? And suddenly, all the people that you know, not just your immediate family, but also people in the town, they are like, well, I don't need to spend time with that guy. Big deal. So, says Chekhov, the fathers and husbands forced temporarily into the background, crowded round the meager refreshment table in the entrance hall. They're not even in the main dance hall. They're in the kind of outside portal. And, says Chekhov, all these government cashiers, secretaries, clerks, and superintendents, stale, sickly-looking, clumsy figures, were perfectly well aware of their inferiority. So now, it's not only that their wives go, oh, these guys are boring, they're uninteresting, look at this guy, I've been with him every single day, you know, he slurps when he eats his porridge, but these guys, these small town officials, they're aware that they can't compare, not in looks, not in stature, they don't have the same cool uniforms as these military guys. They did not even enter the ballroom, says Chekhov, but contented themselves with watching their wives and daughters in the distance dancing among the accomplished and graceful officers. Now, very interesting Chekhov's use of the word contented, because these people are not contented. They're in fact kind of annoyed. They've been upstaged. The military group is sort of dominant. They're like they own the night, and the wives and daughters of these men are all out there having a gay, or gay in the old sense, old time, and the everybody else feels kind of left behind. Now, among the husbands, Chekhov writes, was a guy named Chekov, the tax collector. And right away, Chekhov tells you directly what kind of a person he is. A narrow, spiteful soul given to drink with a big, closely cropped head and thick, protruding lips. He had had a university education. There had been a time when he used to read progressive literature, but now, as he said of himself, he was a tax collector and nothing more. So here's Chekhov giving you the idea that, look, this is a guy who's essentially one-dimensional. There might have been something sort of more about him, interesting about him, but that's now been submerged. And so here he is with his wife, a woman named Anna Pavlovna, and it's the interaction between this guy, Chekov, the tax collector, and his wife that forms the basis of this story called The Husband. I'm continuing my discussion of Chekhov's short story called The Husband, and here's the husband, Chekov, a tax collector, watching his wife, who's a woman, a little brunette of 30, with a long nose and a pointed chin, says Chekhov. And Chekhov describes her as entranced by the ball. She's taken, in a sense, into not only a different world, but the world of her youth. Quote, one could see as she danced that her thoughts were with the past, the faraway past when she used to dance at the College of Young Ladies, dreaming of a life of luxury and gaiety, and never doubting that her husband was to be a prince or, at the worst, a baron. So obviously, she now has a very different life, married to a mundane, a fairly boring guy. And then, says Chekhov, the tax collector watched her scowling with spite. He's very unhappy. Now, Chekhov is right away about to disclose a very important insight, because you might think, well, yeah, here's a guy, his wife is dancing with another man or other men, and so his jealousy is really getting him. But no, says Chekhov right away, quote, it was not jealousy he was feeling. What above everything revolted him and moved him to indignation was the expression of happiness on his wife's face. Quote, it makes me sick to look at her, he muttered, going on 40, nothing to boast of at any time, and she must powder her face and lace herself up and frizzing her hair, flirting and making faces and fancying she's doing the thing in style. And then after a little more of a diatribe, the guy essentially says to himself, quote, an old fright ought to realize she is a fright. And you realize right away, he doesn't even care about his wife. It's not that he is in love with his wife and she might be attracted to someone else. Not at all. He actually despises her. He thinks that she's ugly. But he thinks, wow, this ugly woman thinks that she's cool. She thinks that she's beautiful. She thinks that she's, and the very fact that she's having a good time bothers him. And here's Chekhov. Petty feelings of envy, vexation, wounded vanity. So he waits up to the end of the mazurka, the dance, and then he goes up to his wife, and he basically goes, let's go home. She goes, why? It's quite early. I beg you to come home. Why? Has anything happened? Nothing has happened, but I wish you to go home at once. I wish it. That's enough. And without any further talk, please. So he is ordering her, but he's camouflaging it with a sort of a politeness. Please, we have to go. And so it says, at first Anna Pavlovna refused to hear of it. Then she began entreating her husband to let her stay just another half hour. It's like, you go, I'll follow. But no, he's insistent, and so she has to go. And here we get, really strangely, to the climax of the story. And the climax of the story is with it in the hands of a kind of a lesser author. They have a big debate, and they start discussing, are we compatible? None of this. Coming out of the club, the husband and wife walked all the way home in silence. The tax collector walked behind his wife, watching her downcast, sorrowful, humiliated little figure. And this quote, and this is the crushing line, filled his soul with triumph. Wow, the guy's actually happy that his wife is miserable. He was pleasant and satisfied, and at the same time, he felt the lack of something. So he's missing something. His happiness is not complete. Why? Quote, he would have liked to go back to the club and make everyone feel dreary and miserable, so all might know how stale and worthless life is when you walk along the streets in the dark and hear the slush of the mud under your feet, and you know you will wake up the next morning with nothing to look forward to but vodka and cards. In other words, the guy is miserable because he has a miserable life, and what makes him happy is to see other people as miserable as he is. So he's always trying to pull people down. This is what Chekhov is getting at, and Anna Pavlovna could scarcely walk. She was still under the influence of the dancing, the music, the talk, the lights, the noise. She asked herself as she walked why God had thus afflicted her. So, in other words, she was happy out on the dance floor. She was having, even for a short time, a really good time. But now that she's been pulled away from it, she feels her daily, ordinary life, her misery, even more. She felt miserable, insulted, and choking with hate as she listened to her husband's heavy footsteps. So she despises him. She despises him a little bit for what he is, but she also despises him for the fact that he begrudges her even this momentary flight of, you may say, detachment, of escape, of happiness, of feeling like I'm in another world. But it's only momentary. But even that upsets him. So he yanks her out of that world and right back into his own world. And so what can she do? Quote, she was silent, trying to think of the most offensive, biting, and venomous words she could hurl at her husband. And at the same time, she was fully aware that no words could penetrate his tax collector's hide. So she wants to yell at him, humiliate him, attack him. But she's like, he doesn't care. He's a tax collector. To him, quote, and Chekhov said, what did he care for words? Her bitterest enemy could not have contrived for her a more helpless position. So she has no options. Her best option, which is to lash out, is no option at all because he's like, who cares? And meanwhile, the band was playing and the darkness was full of the most rousing, intoxicating dance tunes. So Chekhov, in a kind of brilliant, that's the ending, flashes right back to the music, the sound, the lights, the dancing is going on. But here we are, away from the scene of the action, given a little window into the very unhappy life of one wife and her husband.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.